السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. ستكون هذه المحاضرة باللغة الإنجليزية، ولمن يرغب بالترجمة إلى العربية يمكن الضغط على علامة الترجمة في الأسفل. Welcome everyone to a new event organized by the Asian Studies program at the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies. My name is Mohammed Al-Ramezan. I'm a research associate at the center. I will be moderating today's events. Our lecture for today will last roughly between 30 and 45 minutes. I will encourage along to write your questions in the designated box, as we will have a Q&A session after the lecture ends. In today's event, titled Islam in Central Asia and the Caucasus since the end of the Soviet Union, we seek to focus on how these new Islamic influences have reached local societies and how they have interacted with their pre-existing religious belief and practices. We aim also to discuss these subjects within the internal dynamics and the external impacts. Today, I'm honored to present our distinguished guest for today, Dr. Bayram Balcı, who is the director of the French Institute for the Anatolian Studies in Istanbul. He's a researcher at the Center for International Studies in Sciences Po in Paris. From 2006 to 2010, he was the director for the French Institute of Central Asian Studies in Tashkent. He was a non-resident scholar in the Russian Eurasia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, D.C. In addition, Dr. Balcı received his degrees in political science with a focus in Arab and Islamic studies from the Political Studies Institute at Grenoble in France. Balcı's current research focus on Islam and politics in the former Soviet Union spaces and on Turkey in its regional environment, Central Asia, Caucasus, and the Middle East. Besides, he is one of the founding members of the European Journal of Turkish Studies. He has over 100 of publications, including over 30 journal articles, several book chapters, and has authored, co-authored, and co-edited several books, including his latest, the co-edited work, Turkey, Russia, and Iran in the Middle East, establishing a new regional order, in addition to another latest book titled Islam in Central Asia and the Caucasus since the fall of the Soviet Union. His work were published in English and French. I would like to call Dr. Balcı to share his views and enlighten us about how and in what ways Islam has been internalized and impacted in Central Asia since the end of the Soviet Union. Dr. Balcı, please share with us your insights about these interesting topics.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. To be honest, I don't know, because we have different participants everywhere in the world. That's why in Istanbul, the weather is excellent. I'm really glad to be with you in Saudi Arabia, in London, and in Europe, and maybe in Turkey too. It's my honor to be with you. I'd like to present the seminar today on Islamic revival in Central Asia. But before that, I would like to have a look at the map. I sent you this morning the map, the sort of PowerPoint. It's really important to have a look at the map of Central Asia and the Caucasus. And the first thing you can see is that Central Asia and the Caucasus is very essentially linked to the history of Russia. So if you want to understand Central Asia and the Caucasus in terms of religious revival, or culture, or international relations, or foreign policy, it's very important to understand, to see that the destiny, the history, and the future of this region is still related to the situation of what happened in Russia and in Moscow. This is the first one. The second remark is that to talk about Central Asia and the Caucasus, for me, it's very easy, and at the same time, it's very complicated, because I started to work on this topic maybe more than 20 years ago. My PhD was devoted to Central Asia in the Caucasus, to the different Islamic influences on Central Asia in the Caucasus. I published a couple of articles, books, and two of them are in the PowerPoint I sent you this morning. First one is in English, the second is in French. And one of them, it will be translated in Turkish and hopefully in Russian and maybe, who knows, in Arabic. Then in the first, as we can see in the first page, I would like to talk about the history of Islam in Central Asia, or the chapter is the inherited Islam, and Islam marked by Russian and Soviet domination. I think that, but before that, we have to see that Islam is very important link in the history of Central Asia. If you visit to Central Asia and the Caucasus, to Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, the local population will tell you that we have a great contribution. We contributed to the development of Islamic civilization. And for the people who live in Saudi Arabia, you know, Ismail al-Bukhari, who was very respected thinker. Originally, he was born in Central Asia, and in Central Asia, you have a lot of things, a lot of centers, universities, institutes on the name of Ismail al-Bukhari. And you have a lot of other Islamic thinkers who came from Central Asia. The first one. The second remark is that Russian domination in the 18th and 19th century, the Central Asia and the Caucasus fell under the domination of Russia. And in Russia, when Russia came to Central Asia and the Caucasus, they started this domination, this colonization started to transform Islam in Central Asia and in the Caucasus. And the Islam we have today, even today, has been partly influenced by the domination of Russia and Russian colonialism. Then in Central Asia and the Caucasus, at the end of the Soviet Union, just before the collapse of the Soviet Union, we had a sort of Islamic revival. The dynamics of this revival can be qualified in two groups. First one was from the local societies, domestic, something very specific to Central Asia and the Caucasus. And the second was came from abroad, from different countries, from other Islamic countries. In Central Asia, at the end of the Soviet Union, just before the collapse of the Soviet Union, as you know, there are the policy of glasnost and perestroika. Glasnost and perestroika in Russian will mean glasnost is sort of transparency, because during the Soviet period, everything was not very transparent. And perestroika means, in the terms of Gorbachev, who had introduced these concepts in the Soviet Union, perestroika was synonym of restructuration, was a sort of synonym of reorganization of the Soviet Union. Thanks to this new atmosphere in Central Asia, it became possible for local societies, Uzbek, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, and Azerbaijani, to develop new imagination, new reflections on Islam, Islamic identity, and the place of Islam in the local societies. This was the domestic issue concerning the Islamic revival. But the second part, the second condition, the second reason, the second wave of influence that has contributed to the Islamic revival came from abroad, from different Islamic countries. And this is the main topic I'm going to present now, immediately. So I wanted to have a sort of very clear presentation. That's why I decided to divide the Islamic revival in Central Asia in the Caucasus in terms of country, in the sense that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, we can qualify, we can divide, we can present the Islamic revival in these countries according to the influence coming from different countries. And these countries are, you have Turkey, Iran, the Saudi Arabia, around Saudi Arabia, the South Asia, and Iran. Yeah, that's why I would like to start with the Turkey and Turkish influence for the revival of Central Asia, Islamic Central Asia in the Caucasus. And why Turkey? Because first reason for Turkey is that to be honest, because it was my PhD topic when I started to work on Central Asia 25 years ago. Initially, I started to work on Turkey, Turkish soft power and influence in Central Asia and the Caucasus. But there is a more scientific reason why I decided to focus on Turkey in Central Asia, because Turkey is not, it's very specific, it's very important country for Central Asia and the Caucasus. The first one, because in terms of identity, Turkey, between Turkey, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, you have a lot of proximities in the terms of, in the sense that in the sphere of language, religion, identity, ethnicity, you have a sort of proximity between Turkey and Central Asia and the Caucasus. And with the end of the Soviet Union, Turkey was among the most important countries to try to develop, to have a sort of sphere of influence in Central Asia and in the Caucasus. That's why initially Turkey started a very ambitious policy, but this policy was a little bit romantic and not realistic. That's why there was a sort of disappointment in the strategy of Turkey to be dominant, to be influential in Central Asia and in the Caucasus. But for today, I would like to focus on how Turkey, despite its specific secular and laicity, as we say in Turkish and in French, identity, Turkey was a very important actor in the dissemination, in the development of Islam in Central Asia. There is a sort of paradox because 30 years ago, when Central Asia became independent, European Western countries were very motivated to push Turkey to be very influential, because there was the fear that these countries could be a sort of excessively Islamist or fundamentalist. And at that time, Turkey was very close. It's not specifically the situation today, but at that time, 30 years ago, the relation between Turkey and the West were excellent. That's why the ambition was to push Turkey to be influential in Central Asia and the Caucasus. And for that, even in the sphere of religion, Turkey became very important in the dissemination of Islamic values in Central Asia. When we want to understand Turkish Islamic influence in Central Asia, we have to distinguish two aspects. The first one is the influence, the Turkish Islamic influence developed by the state officially, and the second by the non-state organizations. For the state, in Turkey, you have a sort of minister of religious affairs, Diyanet. Diyanet is a sort of ministry for the dissemination, for the management of Islam in Turkey. And after 80s, this Diyanet became a sort of instrument of influence for Turkey in different countries. Initially in Europe, because in Europe, you have a lot of Turkish migrants, and Turkey managed to have an influence on this migration, Turkish migration, with the help of the Diyanet. But with the end of the Soviet Union, this Diyanet became a sort of instrument for Turkey to reshape Islamic revival in Central Asia. The first one that is with the Diyanet in each embassies, Turkish embassies in this region, there was a sort of attaché for religious affairs, and the attaché has the obligation to supervise the cooperation, Islamic cooperation between Turkey and Central Asia. More concretely, this Diyanet and the attaché of the Diyanet in these countries, he supported the local policy of construction of new mosques, of education, of creation of faculty of theology, Islamic centers, Islamic educational institutions, and universities. I can give you different examples in Turkey with the support of the Diyanet, in Kazakhstan, in Turkmenistan, in Kyrgyzstan, and in Azerbaijan. A sort of Islamic universities were created because Turkey has a good experience in the management of Islam in Turkey. This was the first one. The second objective with the Diyanet was not only in Central Asia, but even in Turkey, to make new Islamic elites. That's why they invited different students from Central Asia and from the Caucasus, Turkey, to different universities in the field of education, and the students spend sometimes between 3 or 4 or 5 years in different faculty of theology. And in Turkey, they got Islamic education, Islamic experience, and with that, they returned back to Central Asia, and they contributed to the Islamic revival. But the Diyanet has also contributed to the Islamic revival in Central Asia with the transcription, translation of Islamic books from Arabic, from Turkish, to local languages, Uzbek and Kyrgyz, and even Russian. And the objective was to create, to accompany the Turkish foreign policy in this region and to give it a sort of Islamic aspect, because according to the Turkish policymakers, they realized that if you want to be influential in Central Asia, you cannot neglect Islam, because Islam is part of local identities. That's why for Turkey it was important to, despite its secularism, it was important to have a sort of Islamic dimension in her foreign policy for Central Asia and the Caucasus. But maybe you know Turkey is a very big country, and you have a sort of very, very impressive, dynamic private sector. In Turkey, you have the state, but not only the state, you have a lot of tariqat, brotherhoods, Islamic thinkers, Islamic organizations, Islamic groups, Islamic communities, religious communities. You have a lot of waqf, awqaf, and in the in the relation between Turkey and Central Asia, these movements, these non-state actors had their role in the dissemination of Islam in Central Asia. Unfortunately, I cannot give the details of these movements, but in Turkey you have the Naqshbandiya, which is a very important brotherhood. You have other groups like Nurcu or Süleymancılar, and all of them between business, trade, Islamic education, and different construction companies. They went from Turkey to Central Asia, and they contributed to the dissemination, to the development of Islam. If we take the example of Naqshbandiya, you know that Bahauddin Naqshband was born in Central Asia, in Uzbekistan, and in Bukhara, around the mausoleum of Bahauddin Naqshband. A lot of associations initially came to Turkey, and they got the support, they obtained the support of Turkey in order to construct new Islamic madrasa in Central Asia. And we can say that it was successful in the sense that now an important part of the Islamic revival in Central Asia is something which was possible thanks to the cooperation with Turkey. But as you can imagine, Turkey is not the only country. Turkey is not the only country which have interest for Central Asia, because other countries around the world, in the Middle East and Central Asia, try to have a contribution to this Islamic revival. Before developing this, the other countries' contribution, I would like to open a new small chapter on what we can say the Gulen schools in Central Asia. I would like to insist on this point because this movement was very difficult to understand. It was ambiguous. This movement has a problem of transparency, and that's why I would like to focus a little bit on this movement, and then we can start with the issue concerning the other influences. So the Gulen movement, again, was still alive in the US states. Initially, this movement was very active in Turkey, and they were close to the different other brotherhoods. And in Turkey, this movement was very active in the field of education, modern education, in the management of private schools. And with the end of the Soviet Union, this movement managed to go to Central Asia. And in Central Asia, initially they got the support of the Turkish government, and then they opened a lot of schools. But this movement initially wanted to have a sort of Islamic influence in Central Asia, but then they realized that it was very important for them to give a secular education. That's why they managed to open a lot of schools and different universities in Central Asia and the Caucasus. And we can say that the contribution of the dissemination of Turkish Islam was more nationalist than religious. And then in Turkey, the relation between this movement and the government were excellent. But then in 2013, and maybe just a little bit before, a sort of crisis emerged between this movement and the government. That's why we assisted to a divorce between this movement and the Turkish state. And because of this rupture, because of this divorce, all the Gulen schools in Central Asia were closed everywhere in Central Asia, in the Caucasus. And now we can say that the influence of Gulen movement in Central Asia is totally absent. Now, I would like to present more briefly the influence of Iran, because when we talk about Central Asia and Iran and Central Asia and the Caucasus, you know, there are 3 or 4 important countries which had contributed to the Islamic development in Central Asia and the Caucasus. The first one was Turkey, the second is Iran. But in Iran, you know, because Iranian civilization, Iranian culture, historically was very, very active in Central Asia and the Caucasus. In fact, in Central Asia, you cannot divide the Iranian and the Turkic cultures because it was a sort of synthesis. A lot of Emirat, Bukhara, Kokand, and Khiva were partly Turkish and Iranian, Persian culture. That's why even today you have a sort of not only Turkish but even Iranian legacy in Central Asia and the Caucasus. That's why, because of this heritage, Iran, with the end of the Soviet Union, started to have a sort of soft power in Central Asia and the Caucasus. And in terms of religious influence, Iran was very active in Azerbaijan. Because the majority of the population is Shia, because historically Azerbaijan, the Republic of Azerbaijan and Iran were the same state, the same empire. That's why if you go to Azerbaijan today, you can see everywhere in the sort of Iranian influence, because this is something really natural, because with the collapse of the Soviet Union, for the Iranian Shia students or thinkers, the only way to get good education, cooperation, was to go to Iran. And some of them, they went to Qom and to Mashhad. They spent a couple of years in this local madrasa, and they came back to Azerbaijan. So briefly, shortly, Iranian influence is very important in Azerbaijan, but in Central Asia, where the local population is mainly Sunni and not Shia, the influence of Iran is very limited. It's very limited because local population, first of all, they are very secular, so they don't want to sort of, they don't want Iranian influence, as one. The second is that even the local Islam is Sunni, they don't want to have good cooperation, influence with Iran. But despite this difference in terms of mazhab between Shia and Sunni in Iran and Central Asia, in fact, Iranian influence is important in Tajikistan. In Tajikistan, why? In Tajikistan, not because the population is Shia, because the population in Tajikistan is Sunni, except the very small minority of Ismailiya. But thanks to the proximity of language, thanks to the fact that Tajik and Persian is in fact the same group, linguistic group, Iran managed to have influence in Tajikistan, but this influence was thanks to education, to literature, and not necessarily to the religion. That's why, if we want to summarize the Iranian influence in Central Asia and the Caucasus, Iran is still very active in Azerbaijan, but we have very small influence in Central Asia, except in the Irani community in Bukhara and Samarkand. You have a small religious Shia group, and this group has developed some influence with cooperation with Iran. Now, I would like to talk about the Iranian, because it's very schematic, but at the same time, it can help to understand the situation in Central Asia and the Caucasus. The third chapter is influences from Arabic Peninsula or on the revival of Islam in Central Asia and the Caucasus. Because when you live in Central Asia and the Caucasus, there is a sort of tradition, if they want, there is the idea that Salafism, Wahhabism, or radical Islam, or the bad Islam comes from Saudi Arabia and around Saudi Arabia. When you live in Central Asia, this is very common to hear these arguments. That's why I wanted to understand. I spent many months working on this topic. I even visited Saudi Arabia twice. I went to Mecca, Medina, and Taif and Jeddah, and I wanted to understand the Islamic cooperation between Saudi Arabia and Central Asia and Caucasus. In fact, if we want to summarize, we cannot say that all the Wahhabism, Salafism, fundamentalism that was very active in Central Asia and the Caucasus came from Saudi Arabia. This very schematic, there's a sort of exaggeration, but at the same time, we can not deny the fact that there was a good cooperation in the Islamic field between Saudi Arabia or Saudi Arabian movements and Qatar and Kuwaiti, or to be more general, Arabian Peninsula, and the former Soviet Union. And in order to be more clear, I wanted to summarize this influence in two dimensions. First one was the pilgrimage, the Hajj. During the Soviet period, the Hajj was completely absent. It was impossible for local population, Uzbek, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Azerbaijani to go for the Hajj. The Hajj was very limited to the small sphere of professionals of religion in the Soviet Union. But then in 1991, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, it became easier to go to Mecca, Medina for the Hajj. And from Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, every year there was a sort of cooperation between the Ministry of Hajj in Saudi Arabia and local authorities for the attribution of quota in terms of Hajj pilgrimage. And I think that during the pilgrimage, when some people came from Central Asia to visit Mecca, Medina, and Jeddah, some of them, they returned back to their countries with some religious identities that were more usual, common in Saudi Arabia than in Central Asia. So to tell it differently, when they came to Hajj and Mecca and to the Hajj and Umrah in Saudi Arabia, and they returned to their homeland, they wanted to introduce new practices, new perception of Islam, and these new perceptions were considered by the local authorities, the governments, as something very negative, a sort of radical Islam, and because of that, they had some problem with the local authorities. The second dimension of the Islamic cooperation between Central Asia and Saudi Arabia was the presence of two migrant diaspora movements in Saudi Arabia. I think it's very important to analyze the relation between diaspora, religion, religious cooperation in Central Asia and in Saudi Arabia, because when I wanted to understand that, some of them, probably this better than me because we live in Saudi Arabia. So in Saudi Arabia, you have two diasporic communities, two migrations, two groups, Central Asian groups in Saudi Arabia. The first one is the Uzbek or the Bukhari Turkistani community. And the second is that the Uyghurs who came in Saudi Arabia in the 60s. The first one is in the 30s, 40s, because when the Central Asia became very Sovietized, when Stalinism domination was very important, some religious groups, individuals, they left Central Asia and they wanted to immigrate for the Hijrah in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, and in Turkey. And some of them, they came to Saudi Arabia, and you can see them because you have a lot of name al-Bukhari, al-Pakistani everywhere in Saudi Arabia. The second group was the Uyghur who came in Saudi Arabia after the 60s when Mao Zedong came to power in China. And after 1991, what we have seen is that some representative of these communities, especially Uzbek, they went from Saudi Arabia to the homeland of their ancestors, to Fergana Wali, Samarkand, Bukhara, Tashkent, etc. And they contributed to the Islamic revival in the sense that they constructed new mosques, they donated some zakat, some money for the Islamic revival. And for me, it was not necessarily a sort of Salafism or fundamentalism, but for local population and for local governments, this was synonym of Salafism. And again, we can see that there was a sort of confrontation, dichotomy between this Islamic version of Saudi Arabia and the Islamic interpretation of Islam in Central Asia. and to finish with this chapter, I don't think that Saudi Arabia played a very important role in the Islamic development in Central Asia, but at the same time, it was something necessary to underline. And but it was 30 years ago. Now, in each country, you have different manner of living Islam, and one of them is was possible thanks to the relation between local societies and Saudi Arabia. Now there is a third chapter, a third region, which is important in the Islamic revival in Central Asia. This is South Asia. South Asia, you know, because when you talk about South Asia, it's India, because you know that the Mughal dynasty in India, the Mughal, when they created this big, very impressive Islamic civilization in India, this dynasty came from Central Asia, Babur from the local contemporary Samarkand. So during the long time, there were exchanges, there were cooperation between India and Central Asia in the field of education, Islamic literature, Islamic architecture. When you go to India, you can feel the traces, the influence of Islam, Central Asian Islam in Central Asia. For example, the very impressive Taj Mahal, and for a long time, the Brotherhood Naqshbandiya, Mujahideen, this brotherhood was very active between Central Asia and India. But during the Soviet period, it was impossible to have connection between Muslims of India and Central Asia. And after the partition between Pakistan and India, this was still impossible. But with the end of the Soviet Union, again, as Central Asian countries became independent, some of them created some relation with India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. And we can see that thanks to this official organization, official cooperation between these countries, and thanks to the creation of new connection with flights between Central Asian cities and India, some religious organizations came from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh to transform Islam in Central Asia. And there's a very famous one. This is the Jamaat Tabligh. Jamaat Tabligh, you know, it was very important Islamic organization created by Muhammad Ilyas al-Kandalawi in India in the 90s, in 20s. This movement wanted to limit the influence of British domination on India, and they wanted to disseminate Islam and Dawah and Tabligh everywhere in the world. They were active in Europe, in Australia, in the US, in Africa, and in 1991 they came to Central Asia. They came to Central Asia. They were welcomed in two countries, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, but this movement was forbidden in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and other countries. And in fact, this movement still, even today, in Kyrgyzstan, because Kyrgyzstan is more liberal, you have more religious liberty in Kyrgyzstan than the other countries. Thanks to that, in Kyrgyzstan now, even the representative of this Tablighi movement, they have very specific practice. They are everywhere in travel faith. They organize bayan and tabligh in small villages, cities, everywhere in the country. And this movement is very active in the management of Islam in Kyrgyzstan. And the Mufti, the local Mufti of the Republic of Kyrgyzstan, is from this community. I met him several times. So this is to say you that thanks to this movement, to the Tablighi, now you have connection between Central Asia and South Asia, especially between cities of Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India. And now I would like to start the fourth chapter, because it's important to give you an idea of how this movement, is the management of Islam in Central Asia. So as you can imagine, after the end of the Soviet Union, when Islamic revival started with local dynamics and with influences from Turkey, from Central Asia, from India, from Saudi Arabia, the local governments, they wanted to manage, to supervise, to control this Islamic revival. That's why they created, for them, there were two instruments of control of the Islam. First one was education, Islamic education, because during the Soviet period, Islamic education was not possible in the Soviet period because local countries were were secular and Islam was forbidden in the country. That's why Islamic education was something unimaginable. But then, with the end of the Soviet Union, and when they realized that a lot of countries wanted to transform Islam in Central Asia, all local authorities, they wanted to introduce Islamic education in the curriculum. And that's why, for them, they give the education of good Islam, which is for them the Islam which is compatible with the local state and nation, in the sense it is the Islam that is easy to manage and not necessarily the independent Islamic organizations. That's why they created in each country a sort of community or community for the committee for the management of Islam, state community or muftiyat, or the appellation or the denomination. And the idea is still to control Islam. And in fact, this country, they say that they are secular, but they are not totally secular in the sense that it's not secularism in the sense of sort of separation of religion and Islam, but it's secularism in the sense a la Turka, like in Turkey, in the sense that Islam is not independent but controlled by state and by the state organizations. This is something we can see in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Kyrgyzstan, and even Azerbaijan. And the other management of Islam in these countries was to appoint the mufti. The mufti are nominated, are managed by the state, by the government, in the sense that all the mufti in this country, they have to be very loyal to the government. And this is the case in everywhere in all the post-Soviet sphere. Then, when we talk about Islam, unfortunately, there is something important we have to tell is that even in Central Asia there was a radical Islam, because in 1991 some very small groups of Islamic movements, they wanted to criticize the policy of Islam in Central Asia, and that's why they created small groups. This is this one. And during the war in Afghanistan, Afghanistan is very close to Central Asia, its neighbor, and Afghanistan has a border with Uzbekistan and with Tajikistan. That's why during the war of Mujahideen were, it was very positive to be Mujahideen and not jihadist. Mujahideen was very positive in the sense that they were the fighters of the communism in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. This was one. And then in 1991, we had not Mujahideen, but the jihadists. Jihadists is a very bad, negative term in the sense that the people who were in the name of Islam and Islamism, a sort of radical interpretation of Islam, they combated the local states. In the case of Central Asia, some people, they went to Tajikistan and then to Afghanistan, and they were recruited with Al-Qaeda and with other Islamic radical organizations. And for a long time, they were trying to topple the government of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and other countries. But then with the emergence, with the development of jihadism in Iraq and Syria, the majority of these combatants, of these fighters, they left Central Asia and they came to Syria. And now some of them are still present, probably in Idlib or mainly in Idlib. So this is only to say that, in fact, despite the fact that the majority of Islam in Central Asia is not radical, we can still tell that some radical groups, some jihadist groups from Central Asia, they went to the Middle East, and some of them they even traveled to other countries like in America or Europe. Now, I would like to finish with the last development of Islam in Central Asia, in Afghanistan, because that that Afghanistan now is managed by the Taliban after many years, 20 years of invasion, U.S. invasion. Now the U.S. had to leave Afghanistan, and now Afghanistan is managed by the Taliban. And I would like to give some explanation of how this is perceived in Central Asia. as I told you, that Afghanistan is very close to Central Asia in terms of ethnicity, religious groups. In Afghanistan, you have some ethnic groups who are present in Central Asia, like you have Uzbek, Tajik, Turkmen, Kyrgyz. That's why it's a very legitimate for Central Asian states to fear the transformation of Afghanistan and the arrival to power of Taliban. But at the same time, that we have the impression that this risk of spillover from Afghanistan to Central Asia is a little bit exaggerated. Exaggerated because for Central Asian countries, we know that the local population has not at all any sympathy for the Taliban or for the regime of Taliban. First one. The second is that I think that now we have the second generation of Taliban. 20 years ago, they were different from today's Taliban. And we have the feeling that today's Taliban, their motivation is not to transform, to export Islamism and this emirate to neighboring countries, but the priority is to be recognized by the international community. That's why I don't think that they will try to topple or to destabilize Central Asian countries, but still the fear in these countries is that there is a risk of destabilization because of the situation in Afghanistan. So for that, we have to see in the future. I spent 40 minutes. I think I will stop here. And if you have some comments, questions, please do not hesitate to send me your questions. And it will be my pleasure to respond to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Baljer, for the interesting and insightful remarks about these significant matters in respect to Islam in Central Asia and the Caucasus since the Soviet Union. With that, we will open the floor for Q&A session. I would like to invite the audiences to type in their questions in the designated box down the screen. And until we receive another question, I would like to go ahead and ask you, Dr. Baljer, about some important aspects as you refer to in your presentation. The first part I would like to focus on is how these Central Asian and Caucasian states embrace Islam within their states. Do they embrace Islam, or do they wait Islam to be imported from outside? If Islam is going to be imported, would it be imported from Turkey, from Pakistan, from Iran? Why and why not?
Okay. Do you want me to respond right now? We can.
Yes, you can go ahead and respond, of course.
Okay. In fact, if you ask this question to local Central Asian, they will not tell you that they import. For them, they don't want to import Islam from other countries because they will tell you that they don't need Islam from Turkey, from Saudi Arabia, because they even claim that they have the real Islam, because previously Islam was born in Saudi Arabia, but initially the Islamic civilization was very active in Central Asia, in Bukhara, in Samarkand, and indeed we have a lot of a very impressive Islamic heritage in Central Asia. And for them, they don't want to import Islam from these countries, but they will tell you that they would like to have a sort of cooperation. And in each country, in some countries, they want to limit some. I can give you, in fact, it depends on which country. In Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, they don't have the same policy toward Islam. In Uzbekistan, for a long time, with Islam Karimov, who was excessively, very impressively anti-religious, he didn't want any influence from any countries, even from Turkey, from Saudi Arabia. They were categorically in opposition to any influence. But in other countries, in Kyrgyzstan, for them, priority is to have good relations with everybody, each groups, because for them, Islamic cooperation is at the same time a sort of development, because it's the possibility to have education, to have new buildings, to have salaries, to have money. That's why in Kyrgyzstan, they try to cooperate with Saudi Arabia, with Turkey, with Qatar, with even with Iran. But in other countries, in Azerbaijan, in particular, I was very impressed by the situation in Azerbaijan, because in Azerbaijan, in terms of religion in Islam, for them it's more natural to cooperate with Iran than with Turkey. Why? Because 80% of the population in Iran is Shia, like in Iran, but not Sunni. But despite this proximity, Azerbaijani authorities, they prefer the cooperation with Turkey because Turkey was a sort of Western country, very close to Europe, to the US. And for them, they wanted to be more integrated with the European, with the Western civilization than with Iran. And because with Iran, despite the proximity in the field of Shia, they had some problem at the border, and in the Karabakh issue, the Iranian position was more inclined to support Armenia than Azerbaijan. That's why they prefer the Turkish influence. But to respond to your question, in some cases, local countries, they don't want to import Islam, but this is something that imposed by the logic of business and trade. In the case of Turkey, maybe half of the Islamic influence, or maybe more, belongs to the non-governmental organizations, in the sense that some tariqat, turuq, Naqshbandiya, Qadiriya, or Suleymanja or Nurju, they go to Central Asia for business, but at the same time, they export Islamic ideas from Turkey. That's it.
Thank you. We also have a question here from Professor Amdu Sani, the Vice Chancellor of Fountain University, Osogbo, Nigeria. He's asking question about, in case Turkey shutting down on the Gulen movements and its religious and Islamic causes, organization and activity within Turkey and abroad, especially within out of Turkey. Within Turkey, shutdown and Gulen movements leave some Muslims, like in Africa, vulnerable to any other imported Islam from other non-state actors.
To this question, in fact, yeah, as I told you, Miriam, in Turkey, the Gulen movement is completely forbidden now. You don't have any Gulen organization in Turkey. That's the first one. The second is that after the coup d'etat, the failed coup d'etat in Turkey in 2016, in the combat, the fight against the Gulen movement everywhere in the world was a priority for the Turkish diplomacy. That's why they combated them everywhere in Central Asia, in the Caucasus, in Africa, in Asia, in the US, in Europe. That sometimes they managed to combat them in a lot of countries, but not in the Western countries, and especially in the US and Europe. And in the countries where the Gulen schools were very influential, the Turkish government created a sort of new organization, new instrument with this new organization, which is the name of Marif. Marif, it's a Turkish state organization for the education in these countries. And in some countries, the Gulen movement were closed, but replaced by new schools under the control of the Turkish government, which is the case in Senegal, in other countries. But in some countries in Central Asia, the local authorities had initially hesitated to close this movement's schools because the schools were good for them. But then when they realized that Erdogan was really motivated, it was a priority for him, everywhere in Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, in all these countries, even in Kyrgyzstan 2 years ago, they managed to close the schools. And now Turkey proposes to these governments new schools with more presence and influence of Turkey than the Gulen movement. And I don't think that, and when we talk about the Gulen movement in different countries, we have to give the definition of this schools. In fact, the majority of the schools initially wanted to have sort of Islamic education, Islamic curriculum, but now at the end, for them, the priority was more to have power, influence, and soft power, and dissemination and infiltration than to serve Islam and Islamic education in this country. That's why it was easier for them to be accepted by local countries, because local countries the elites wanted more education than less religion. That's why, and now in the field of Islamic education, I think that Turkey is capable of giving Islamic services in these countries, and they don't need the support of Gulen, because in Turkey you have so many other Islamic groups, Naqshbandi, Süleymancı, Nurcu, and it's easy, really easy for Turkish government to replace the Gulen schools everywhere in the world.
Thanks. We also have another question from the head of the Asian Studies Program, Mohammed Steri. He's asking you a question about Naqshbandi that you discussed. The Mujaddidis operating between India and Central Asia, are they linked to the Cypriot-based Naqshbandis, which is led by Al-Haqqani?
Can you repeat the question, the last part of the question, please?
Yes. Are the Naqshbandis that you discussed and referred to in your presentation, the Mujaddidis operating between India and Central Asia, linked to the Cyprus-based Naqshbandis, which is led by Al-Haqqani?
Okay, yeah. In fact, I think that you have, it's really excellent question. Thank you very much. In Turkey, when you talk about the Naqshbandi, you have so many groups. The majority of them are in Istanbul, and you have the group of Osman Nuri Topbaş, which is linked to the Mahmut Hudayi Vakfı, this first one. The second is that Süleymancı is very Naqshbandi group. And for them, I think the Naqshbandi group I have seen in Central Asia are mainly not from Cyprus, but from the Istanbul group of Mahmut Hudayi Vakfı and Osman Nuri Topbaş and Süleymancı. Why? Because from here, it's easier to go, because they had good connection with the Turkish government, and it was easier for them to go to Central Asia with local official delegations for forum, business forum, and trade. And that's why it's easier for them to be influential. And the second way is that Turkey invited a lot of students from Central Asia to study in Turkey, in Turkish universities. And it was a possibility for them to recruit among the students and then to send them back to Central Asia in order to disseminate the new ideas of Naqshbandiya.
Thanks. Also, another follow-up question here from Mohammed Steri. Can you speak a bit about the role of non-Muslim external actors in the religious landscape of Central Asia and the Caucasus, such as Russia, if any?
Yeah, you mean non-Islamic actors or
yes, non-Muslim actors?
Oh, you know, Central Asia after the Soviet Union, it was a paradise for the many proselytic movements from the US, from China, from Korea. You have the Baptists, the Adventists, and a lot of Orthodox other movements. And the problem was for the local government was to control these influences, because a lot of local population were converted to Christianity, because some of them had more economic than religious motivation. Because when you have very influential or rich organization coming from the US or from Germany or from other countries, it was very easy for them to recruit among the local population, especially for Muslims who, thanks or because of long Soviet domination, they didn't realize if they were Muslim or not, and some of them was that their Islam was very weak. That's why it was easy for them to convert. But then, after 5 years of religious liberty, total liberty in Central Asia, the local governments managed to control everything, and now we can see that the influence of non-Islamic organizations is very limited in these countries.
Well, with that, probably you could shed a little bit light on the non-Muslim external actors that involved within Muslim religious landscape in Central Asia.
The non-Muslim actors?
In Muslims in Central Asia, in the sphere of Islam.
Yeah, in fact, we have a lot of In fact, it's mainly the case in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. Why? Because in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, you have a lot of Russian populations, and for them it was easier. It was easier for non-Muslim organizations to be influential among these Russians, and at the same time benefiting from this presence to try to influence not only local Russian Orthodox populations, but at the same time some people, some previously Muslim population, and with the idea to convert them to Christianity, which is something was possible in Kazakhstan, and with the presence of Tatar, because Tatar, the Tatar were partly Muslim, partly Christian, and that's why it was easy for them to create some connection between non-Muslim organizations and Islam in Central Asia and in the Caucasus.
With this, Janice John saying thank you for this extensive and informative talk. She has two questions. One, you mentioned that Diyanet mediated the Turkish migration to Europe. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, the first one, I can really easily answer the question because I was born in Turkey and grew up in France. And all of my brothers, my family is in France. And I remember during the 80s, the Diyanet sent some imam and educators to France, to Germany, because the Turkish government, and it was largely before Erdogan and Erbakan, it was even in the 80s, and when in a period when the government was more secular than today. So for the Turkish government, it was very important to have a link with the local population, with Turkish migration in Europe. And I remember we received some imam and educators, and after the school, the French school, we used to go to the other institution and to have some education in Turkish and on Islam. And for Turkey, it was important to maintain a contact with them. But then after Erdogan came to power, for him, as now we have millions and millions of Turks in Europe, because previously in the 80s, it was a very small group, but now it's a bigger group and they can have a political role in Germany, in France, and in Netherlands. The local government now, Tayyip Erdogan, tries to transform this community in a sort of political power, political influence for two reasons. The first one, to get their support in the local election in Turkey, and the second, to use them as a sort of power to influence the local governments in France, in Germany, and Netherlands. That's why sometimes, in some cases, it creates some frictions, some opposition between the Turkish government and the European governments. But that's like you have a lot of countries in the world where there is the same tradition of trying to transform the diaspora in a political power and influence. And you had the second question, yeah?
Yes. In addition to this, also Janice posed the following question: do the Uzbeks that they were in Saudis in the 1990s, when they left to Central Asia, did their going back to Central Asia and Uzbekistan involve business and familial ties?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
you witnessed this with the Chinese diaspora when they went back to China.
Yeah, but it was the case more with Central Asia, with the Soviet and Russian Soviet Central Asia than with the China, because for the Uyghur it is still very difficult to travel to China because you know the nature of the regime in China. Unfortunately, a criminal regime. There is a very hard repression against Uyghur. But in the case of post-Soviet Central Asia, I mean Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, for them it was easier to go to business in Saudi Arabia, and indeed doing business was part of the reason, motivation for the Turkistani population of Saudi Arabia. But to be honest, I think the most important point to mention here is that in the Turkistani population community in Saudi Arabia, it was the old generation, because the people between 70 or 80 years, because for them, they knew the country before the migration to Saudi Arabia, and they played the old, as we say in Turkish, aksakal, the old generation played an important role. And for them, it was a sort of romantic approach to return back to the homeland than to transform the local population because they didn't want to transform corporate societies. For them, the priority was to have connection between the homeland and the new country. And the young generation of Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, the majority have been completely integrated, assimilated to Saudi Arabia, and few of them want to be involved in business and Islamic education between Saudi Arabia and Central Asia.
With this, I would like also to pose a question to you, Dr. Balja. Considering Central Asian states, they not all speak Turkic languages. For instance, Tajikistan is speaking Persian. Would this linguistic connection with Iran give Iran more an upper hand on projecting a kind of different religious influence in Tajikistan more than the other Central Asian states?
Yeah, indeed. But at the same time, concerning the relation between, I was very impressed by the fact that Turkey is a Turkic country and Tajikistan is not a more Persian language country. But despite that, Turkey has good connection with Tajikistan for different reasons. First one, because you have, even in Tajikistan, 25% of the population which is Uzbek, they speak Turkish, a language close to Turkish. And the second is that in Tajikistan, the government wanted to have good relation between Turkey for economic reasons, because Tajikistan had complicated relation with the neighbors. It was isolated, and for them having good relation with Turkey was very important. But in the field of education and religious cooperation, indeed, it was easier for Iran than for Turkey to be active in Central Asia and in Tajikistan. But in Tajikistan, the influence of Iran was mainly thanks to the Persian literature and to the presence of in the Badakhshan of the small community of Ismailiya, because it's very close to the Shia, it's the second branch of the Shia. That's why. And I was very impressed when I visited different universities in Iran. Some Ismailiya who came to Iran for education, they returned back to the country becoming very Shia in the sense of Jafarid. It was very impressive to see that.
With this also, if you could elaborate a little bit on how different Islam is projected within Central Asia in comparison with the Caucasus.
Oh, to be honest, in fact, in the Caucasus, the only Muslim country is Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan is partly Shia, partly Sunni. And in the Caucasus, you have Georgia. In Georgia, you have the region of Ajaria, close to Turkey, which is very Sunni, because previously during the Ottoman period, it was Islamized by the Ottomans near Batumi. And in Georgia, the border with Azerbaijan is very Shia, the local version is Shia. But then the rest of the Caucasus, in the South Caucasus, Islam is located in Azerbaijan. And if we want to associate the Northern Caucasus, the situation changed completely, because in the Northern Caucasus, local population is mainly Sunni, but it's Islamic Sunni, like in Dagestan, in Chechnya, in Kabardino-Balkaria, and in Bushetia. But in my research, I didn't incorporate the North Caucasus, because it's very complicated. You have to try to devote one book to each community. The difference between Central Asia and the Caucasus is that in the Caucasus, Islam is Azerbaijan, and the rest in Armenia. Unfortunately, because of the Karabakh War, all the Muslims of Armenia, they left the country. You have Azerbaijani, Kurdish, but now the local population in Armenia is completely Armenian and Christian. But the difference is that you have Shia in the Caucasus, but you have almost no Shia in Central Asia. This is the main difference between the two regions. But in the management, Islam is the same, because it was the Soviet tradition, Russian Soviet perception, management of Islam. You have the same reflex. This local Islam is very different. When you work on Islam in the Middle East, in Turkey, in Iran, and you go to Central Asia, you can be very surprised, because local traditions, especially just after the end of the Soviet Union, you had a very specific local Islam. It was a sort of Russian Soviet Islam in the sense it was, even I remember I was invited to different seminars related concerning Islam, and initially they used to drink vodka because for them it was something natural because it was part of the tradition. That's why. But now, after 30 years of cooperation with other countries, now local Islam is different, and you have very strong Islamic beliefs in Central Asia, and some of them they continue to have a sort of very soft Islam, something very influenced by the local Soviet tradition.
With that, as I understood from your presentation, that the role of Islam is important within Central Asia, probably is more relevant than in Caucasus. Within the context of Turkey, as an increasing power, especially in relation to Central Asia, with the history it has and the shared and common heritage with the Central Asian states, does Turkish foreign policy include more of Islam than pragmatic bilateral relation with the Central Asian states?
I think that concerning Turkey at the beginning, just after the almost Soviet Union, Turkey there was a contradiction because Turkey wanted to be influential in Central Asia, and they didn't want to export Islam in Central Asia because for them the most important was ethnicity, Turkish language, Turkish identity. But then when they realized that there was a demand for Islam in Central Asia, and they had the impression that if they don't want to cooperate in Islam, if they don't want to export Islam, this Islam will be more under the influence of Saudi Arabia or Iran. That was a sort of competition. That's why Turkey developed even the secular governments in Turkey, even before Erdogan, local Turkish governments, they gave a sort of priority, a sort of importance to the Islamic aspect of the influence in Central Asia, because for them it was a way to get a sort of Turkish soft power in Central Asia. And I think that was a good idea because now when you go to Central Asia and Caucasus, you have, despite the fact that usually traditionally Islamic elites, they are supposed to speak Arabic, not necessarily Turkish, but in Central Asia, you have now a lot of new imams who speak Turkish and not necessarily Arabic, which is very surprising. It was already tried by them. So I think Turkey, and in fact in the between 2002 and 2010, when we had a sort of very strong Turkish economy, Turkish soft power everywhere in the world, this has contributed to the dissemination of Turkish influence in Central Asia, and at the same time, Turkish Islamic vision in Central Asia.
Thanks. We have reached the limit time we have for this lecture. Before I conclude, do you have a final comment about the subjects discussed?
Oh, thank you very much. In fact, I was supposed to return to Saudi Arabia for my field research, but unfortunately, because of COVID, because of the difficulty to travel now, it was not possible. Hopefully, inshallah, in the future, I will be able to travel again and to do, because there are still some good research to do in Saudi Arabia on the diasporic communities, especially on the population coming from Afghanistan, because I did my field research on Uzbek and Uyghur, but you have the people who came from Afghanistan, and very few academic research would have on this community. And maybe in the future, I would like to visit and to do some research in Saudi Arabia.
Thanks. We will be happy to welcome you when you come in the future.
Inshallah.
Then with that, I would like to thank you, Dr. Bayram, for this participation and insightful presentation. I would like also thank the audience for attending with us this event. And for more information about the work and the project of the Asian Studies Program and other research units at the center, please visit its website, and you may also subscribe to the center email newsletter to be updated in the future for events and publications. Until we see you then in a future event organized by the King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies. I hope you all have a good day. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Thank you very much.
You too. Thanks.